The air in Training Arena Gamma 7 was cold and carried the sharp, clean scent of recycled oxygen and industrial-grade polish. The massive, dome-shaped space was a symphony of controlled chaos. Holographic projectors flickered, creating shifting obstacle courses in midair. In one corner, a squad of Vulpian cadets, their fox-like forms sleek in their pressure suits, practiced precision leaps between floating platforms. In another, a hulking Taraxi, balanced expertly on 4 powerful legs, demonstrated a hydraulic-assisted lift to a group of watching species. In the center of it all, Cadet Sergeant Instructor Lee June stood with her hands clasped behind her back. Her dark eyes tracked a mixed unit of 10 cadets as they fumbled through a zero-gravity tactical drill. The unit was a standard Galactic Union mix: 2 humans from off-world colonies, a slender aquatic Firene from Europa, the stout Taraxi named Quan Li, and a few others. June watched as Choi Day, a human cadet from the Venusian cloud cities, misjudged his thruster burst and spun uncontrollably, colliding with the Firene. A series of angry bubbles erupted from the Firene's communication mask. Quan Li, the Taraxi, anchored himself to a handhold with 2 of his lower limbs and used his upper limbs to expertly snag a drifting data crystal, his 4 eyes blinking with calm satisfaction. Regather at the central node. June's voice was calm but carried clearly through the comms. Your unit cohesion is non-existent. You are 5 individuals drifting, not a team moving. The cadets, some sheepish, some annoyed, made their way back to the starting platform. Choi Day's face was flushed under his helmet's visor. This suit's thruster calibration is off for my mass, he grumbled, not directly at June, but loud enough to be heard. June did not acknowledge the excuse. The enemy will not calibrate their weapons to your comfort, Cadet Choi. Your awareness must compensate. All of you, dismissed for mid-cycle sustenance. The group dispersed towards the locker rooms. June remained for a moment, watching the next class flow into the arena. She was used to being overlooked. Of average height and lean build, she did not stand out like the muscular Venusians or the imposing Taraxi. Her uniform was perfectly standard, but there was a stillness to her posture, a sense of being utterly planted, that was uncommon in the constant motion of the academy. Later, in the vast, brightly lit mess hall, the cacophony of 100 different species eating and talking was a familiar backdrop. June sat with her usual companion, Park Min, a friendly-faced cadet from a Martian agricultural dome. They ate a simple protein and grain mix, talking little. Park Min was discussing an upcoming navigation exam when June's attention drifted to a nearby table. IT was the same mixed unit from her drill, now joined by a few others. The topic of conversation had shifted. And tomorrow we have that Earth combat module, said Kim Hannah, a sharp-eyed cadet from Tycho Base on the moon. She sounded more curious than anything. Quan Li let out a low rumble, a sound like grinding stones. He placed his eating utensil down with deliberate care. I have reviewed the syllabus. Kinetic redistribution. Rooting principles. It is a philosophical exercise. A dance. His 4 eyes narrowed. The Terran homeworld's military value is in its history and its shipyards. Their physical disciplines are for light-gravity beings who have forgotten the true meaning of pressure. Choi Day nodded vigorously, swallowing a large bite of synthesized meat. Exactly. I saw the demos. It's all about using an opponent's energy against them. Sounds clever, until you face a Taraxi charge or a Vulpian sonic disruptor. Why learn to gently push someone when you can just hit them with a repulsor blast? He grinned. It's easy. It's for show. A cultural relic. The words easy and for show hung in the air around June's table. Park Min stiffened. They have no idea, he murmured to June. June took a slow sip of water. Her expression did not change, but her knuckles were white where she held her cup. She had heard this before many times. The Galactic Union respected human technology, their resilience, their adaptability. But the physical arts born from Earth itself, those were often seen as quaint, archaic, and most damningly soft. You should say something, Park Min whispered. You're the instructor for that module. What would I say? June replied, her voice low. That they are wrong? They have their own truths. The Venusians live in floating cities. The Martians live under domes with 0.4 g. The Taraxi evolved under a crushing sky. Their realities are different, but they're disrespecting the Foundation, Park Min insisted. The Foundation is invisible to them, June said, finally looking at him. A small, unreadable smile touched her lips. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knows the weight of a secret. Until it isn't. At the other table, the conversation moved on to comparing the merits of plasma rifles versus particle beams. The dismissal of Earth's combat arts was complete, a passing thought they had already forgotten. June finished her meal in silence. She watched Quan Li walk away, his 4 legs carrying his dense mass with a pride born of a heavy world. She watched Choi Day flex his shoulders, showing off for a fellow Venusian cadet. She felt the familiar, gentle pull of the station's artificial gravity, a mere shadow of the constant, demanding embrace of the world she came from. A world that had, for generations, shaped every bone, every muscle, every fighting style around one simple, inescapable fact. Everything falls down and you must stand against it. She stood up, her movements economical and precise. See you at the module tomorrow, Park Min, she said. He nodded, still looking concerned. Are you going to be okay? June's small smile returned. I am always okay. I am from Earth. We are built to be okay. She walked out of the mess hall, her boots making soft, solid sounds on the deck plating. The cadets did not notice her leave. Their minds were already on louder, brighter, more powerful things. The quiet instructor from the gentle, old world was of no consequence to them. Not yet. The next day, the cadets filed into a different training hall. This one was for close quarters instruction. The floor was a smooth, seamless sheet of advanced polymer, dark gray and slightly soft underfoot. It was famous for its ability to absorb incredible impacts without a mark. The walls were lined with holographic projectors and racks of practice weapons from a dozen different cultures. Li Jun stood at the front of the room. She had changed into a simple, durable training uniform. It was plain and unadorned. The other cadets wore similar clothes, but some, like Choi Day, had added pieces of their own gear. Choi wore reinforced arm guards from Venus, sleek and etched with lightning patterns. Quan Li, the Taraxi, stood on the polymer floor without any cushioning pads on his hard hoof-like feet. He looked completely solid, a statue of muscle and bone. June waited for them all to settle. Her eyes moved over the group. She saw Kim Hannah, the lunar cadet, sitting attentively at the front. She saw Park Min offering her a small, supportive nod. She saw the bored expression on Choi Day's face and the look of polite skepticism in Quan Li's 4 eyes. Good morning. June began, her voice clear and even. This module is an introduction to Terran close combat principles. Specifically, we will look at adapted forms of Hapkido and Taekwondo. The core idea is not about meeting force with greater force. It is about redirection. It is about balance. The most important concept today is called rooting. A holographic image appeared beside her. It showed a simple human figure standing on a line. Arrows pointed from the figure's feet down into the ground. Rooting is the practice of creating a stable connection to the ground. It is about using the floor, the deck, the planet itself as a source of stability and power. Your strength does not start in your arms. It starts in your feet, travels through your legs and your core, and then is expressed through your hands. Choi Day let out a quiet sigh, barely muffled. He exchanged a look with another Venusian cadet. Quan Li shifted his weight, his 4 legs making a soft tapping sound on the polymer. Instructor, Quan Li said, his voice deep. With respect. Stability is known to my people. The Kroth discipline of my world begins with the mountain stance. It teaches how to stand against the great winds of the high plateaus. How is this different? It is a matter of source, June said. Your mountain stance is about your own mass, your own strength, resisting an outside force. Rooting is about connection. It is not just standing on the ground. It is standing with it. She could see the explanation was not landing. The words were too abstract. Can you show us? Kim Hannah asked from the front row. Her voice was curious, not challenging. Yes, a simple exercise. June walked to the center of the floor. I need a volunteer to try and push me off balance. Choi Dae immediately stepped forward, a confident smile on his face. I'll do it, instructor. Very well, Cadet Choi. Stand here. Place your hands on my shoulders. When I say push, use your strength to move me backward. Choi took his position. He was taller and broader than June. He planted his feet in what he thought was a strong stance and put his hands on her shoulders. June stood normally, her arms loose at her sides. She took a slow breath in, and as she breathed out, her posture seemed to change. It was not a dramatic shift. She did not tense her muscles. Instead, she seemed to settle. Her feet, in their simple training shoes, appeared to become part of the dark gray floor. Push, June said. Choi pushed. His arm and shoulder muscles tightened. He leaned his weight into her. June did not move. She did not brace against him. She simply stood there, as immovable as a post sunk deep into concrete. Choi's smile faded. He pushed harder, grunting with the effort. His feet slipped slightly on the polymer as he tried to drive forward. June remained perfectly still, her body aligned, her gaze calm. After a moment, she said, "Thank you, Cadet Choi. Return to your place." Choi stepped back, his face now flushed with confusion and a little embarrassment. He rubbed his arms. "How did you do that? Tensile fibers in the uniform?" "No fibers," June said. "It is rooting. I am not stronger than you. I am simply connected to something much larger than myself." She turned to the class. "This is the foundation. From this stability we can redirect force." She began to demonstrate a simple wrist lock, a move designed to use an attacker's momentum against them. As she spoke about angles and leverage, the earlier dismissal in the mess hall began to bubble back to the surface among the cadets. The lesson felt slow, felt theoretical. They were warriors training for starship breaches and asteroid field skirmishes. This felt like a history lecture. During a break, as cadets took water, the murmuring started. Choi Dae was speaking to Kwon Lee. "It's a neat trick, for balance, but in a real fight, if someone charges you, you don't want to just stand there. You want to knock them out. Fast." Kwon Lee nodded, his head moving slowly on his thick neck. "My thoughts are similar. This is a defensive art. It is for waiting. The cloth of my people is for ending. When we strike, we break. We do not push." He looked at June, who was sipping water alone by the wall. "There is no power in it, only cleverness." The word easy was not spoken again, but it hung in the air. This was all just too simple, too passive. It was a system for a lighter, gentler world. June heard the murmurs. She finished her water and placed the bottle neatly in a recycler. She felt the familiar quiet frustration. They saw the surface movement but not the deep current. They saw a wrist lock but not the tectonic principle behind it. They wanted to see power they could understand, explosive, loud, direct. The final segment of the class was for questions. Kwon Lee stood again. His forelegs were spread wide, a natural, powerful stance. "Instructor Lee," he began, his tone formally respectful but carrying an edge. "Your words are understood, but they remain only words. My homeworld's gravity is 1.8 Terran standard. The Croth discipline has been used to break the silicate shells of deep-crust predators. Can bend metal. Can your rooting and redirection demonstrate a fraction of that kind of power? Can this easy dance show us something real?" The room fell completely silent. Every cadet turned to look at June. This was not just a question. It was a direct, public challenge to the worth of everything she had just taught. Park Min looked worried. Kim Hannah looked intensely interested. Choi Dae looked expectant, waiting for the polite theory to crumble. June looked at Kwon Lee. She looked at the strong, proud alien who represented a world of brute force. Then she looked down at the dark, unmarked polymer floor of the training arena, a floor that was famous for being unbreakable. The silence in the training hall was heavy, the kind of quiet that comes after a door slams shut. All the subtle murmurs and shuffles had stopped. Every cadet was frozen, watching the space between Cadet Sergeant Instructor Li Jun and Cadet Quan Li. June did not get angry. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at Quan Li for a long moment, her face calm. The challenge was now a solid thing in the room. It could not be taken back with theory or words. Then, her gaze slowly drifted away from the Taraxi cadet. It moved down, past her own simple training shoes, to the dark gray surface beneath them. She studied the floor as if seeing it for the first time. "This arena floor," June said, her voice breaking the quiet but not easing the tension. "It is a grade 7 impact polymer. Its technical specifications are in your Academy database. It is designed to absorb and disperse kinetic energy. Can withstand the heat of a plasma torch. It can survive a direct strike from a Class 2 infantry plasma cutter without structural failure." She finally looked up, her eyes meeting Quan Li's again. "For the purpose of hand-to-hand combat, it is considered unbreakable. It is a safety feature. It is meant to not be marked." The cadets glanced at the floor. They had all taken it for granted, like the walls or the ceiling. It was just the floor. Choi Dae shifted, crossing his arms. He seemed impatient with the technical details. June began to walk. Her steps were slow and measured as she moved toward the very center of the open practice area. The sound of her soft-soled shoes was the only sound in the room. She stopped in a wide, empty space, far from the wall racks and holographic projectors. "The power you speak of, Cadet Quan Li, is impressive," she continued, still facing the class but now standing alone in the center. "It is outward. It is explosive. It is about your mass, your muscle, your will applied against a target to break it." She held up one hand, fingers loosely curled. "It is a hammer." She let her hand fall to her side. "The power I am attempting to teach is different. It is first inward, then through. It is not about your strength against the world. It is about borrowing the world's own strength. It is about becoming a channel. Not a hammer, but a piston." She could see the confusion and lingering skepticism on their faces. The analogy meant nothing to them. Piston was a machine part. It was not a warrior's spirit. So she offered them something else. "You asked for a demonstration of power, not theory. I accept." A ripple went through the class. Park Min leaned forward, his hands gripping his knees. Kim Hana's eyes were wide. Choi Dae uncrossed his arms, a smirk starting to form. He was expecting a showy, high kick, something that would look flashy but prove nothing against real armor or alien hide. June did not get into a dramatic fighting stance. She turned her body slightly to the side, her right foot sliding forward. It was a basic, fundamental posture. She held her hands open, left hand extended in front, right hand held near her hip. "I will show you one movement, the most basic application of the principle. A simple forward palm strike." The disappointment was almost audible. A few cadets sighed. A palm strike? Even they knew that. It was child's play. Quan Li's stance did not change, but one of his lower legs tapped the floor twice, a sign of deep skepticism among his people. He had expected her to refuse or to demonstrate on a practice dummy. Not this. June ignored them. Her focus left the room. It left the watching cadets, the proud Quan Li, the smirking Choi Dae. Her gaze lowered to a single point on the dark gray floor, about 2 feet in front of her own leading foot. She did not coil her muscles. She did not take a big wind-up. Instead, she did something that seemed strange. She closed her eyes. She took a breath. It was not a sharp gasp for effort. It was a deep, slow, pulling breath that filled her lungs completely. As she breathed in, the cadets saw her shoulders relax. The last bit of tension seemed to drain from her neck and arms. But at the same time, her legs, from her hips down to her feet, seemed to become more solid. It was like watching a tree settle its roots after a long drought. Park Min recognized it suddenly. It was the way old men stood on crowded Earth subways, braced without bracing, stable against the lurch and pull of the massive train. It was a posture born from a lifetime of never being able to take gravity for granted. In her mind, June was not on a space station. She was on the packed earth training yard of her grandmother's house in Gyeongju. The air was humid and thick. The weight of the world pulled at every cell in her body, a constant, heavy friend. She could feel the imagined ground, firm and unyielding, beneath her feet. She was not going to hit the floor. She was going to push against the entire planet behind it. Her eyes opened. They were calm and clear. She exhaled. The movement was not fast in a snapping way. It was deliberate and heavy. Her right palm, fingers straight and held together, began to travel forward from her hip. It did not whip through the air, push through it as if moving through deep water. Her body turned, her hip leading, her shoulder following, her arm extending. It was all one connected motion, from the sole of her back foot, up through her leg, spiraling through her core, and out along her arm. There was no cry, only a sharp, hard grunt of air forced from her lungs. Hut! As her palm reached the end of its path, her hand did not smash downward onto the floor. It struck forward and down, aiming for that point 6 inches below the arena's pristine surface. The point of impact was not with a slap, but with a solid, meaty thump. For 1 full second, nothing happened. June was frozen in the finishing position, her palm flat against the dark gray polymer. Choi Dae's smirk returned fully. It had been a performance. A good one, but just noise and a pose. Then, a sound reached them, but it didn't come through the air to their ears first. It came up through the floor and into the bones of their feet and legs. A deep, resonant thump, felt in the chest, like the beat of a massive drum buried deep in the earth. And then the floor, the famous unbreakable grade 7 impact polymer, cracked. The sound was not loud. It was a sharp, high snap, like ice breaking on a deep pond. It cut through the deep thrumming feeling that still hung in the air. Every eye in the training hall snapped down to the floor. Right where the edge of Lee Jun's palm met the dark gray surface, a thin, jagged white line had appeared. It was no wider than a thread. For a moment, it just sat there, a single mark of failure on a perfect floor. Then, another crack branched from it, and another. The sound became a rapid series of tiny popping snaps. A spiderweb of fractures raced outwards from the point of impact. The lines spread in a rough circle, reaching out almost 3 feet in every direction. They did not spread in a neat pattern. They were wild and angry, a tiny frozen explosion captured in the polymer. In the very center, where her palm had landed, the material was not broken through, but it was visibly depressed, a shallow crater no deeper than a coin. The silence that followed was total. It was a stunned, disbelieving quiet. The air itself felt charged. No one moved. No one breathed. Choi Dae's smirk had vanished. His mouth was slightly open. His eyes were locked on the cracked floor, tracing the lines as if trying to solve a puzzle that made no sense. His brain, trained on Venusian cloud mining mechanics and repulsor physics, could not process it. He had seen power armor punch through metal. He had seen plasma cut steel. He had never seen a human, with just their hand, break something that was supposed to be unbreakable. The word easy was ashes in his mind. Quan Li, the Taraxi, took a single step forward. His 4 heavy legs moved with slow, deliberate care. He lowered his large head, his 4 eyes blinking in different sequences as he examined the fractures. His people were builders and miners by nature. They understood stone and structure. He saw that the cracks were not a surface scratch. They were deep, structural failures within the polymer matrix. This was not a trick. This was fundamental damage. The deep thump they had felt was the energy traveling down and then out, finding the limits of the material. A slow rumble, a sound of pure astonishment, escaped his chest. It was not a challenge. It was awe. Kim Hannah had risen from her seat without realizing it. She took a few steps closer, her analytical mind racing. She had seen the stance, the breath, the slow, heavy motion. She had watched June not fight the floor, but connect with something beyond it. The lunar colonies had weak gravity. Every movement was a calculation, a conservation of momentum. What she had just witnessed was the opposite. It was the deliberate, terrifying application of momentum, borrowed from a force she could only imagine. She looked from the floor to June's face, searching for a sign of strain, of effort. June was straightening up. She brought her hand back and looked at her palm. The skin was red, like a mild sunburn. There was no blood, no broken bones. She flexed her fingers slowly, then let her hand fall to her side. Her breathing was even. She showed no sign of pain or exhaustion. The act had not drained her. It had, if anything, centered her. She turned to face the cadets. Her expression was the same as it had been at the start of the class. Calm, composed, quiet. But now that calmness felt completely different. It was not the quiet of something small. It was the quiet of deep water or of a mountain. It was a quiet that contained the echo of that deep, bone-shaking thump. "That," she said. Her voice was the same even tone, but in the perfect silence, it carried like a bell. "Is the basic application of kinetic transfer. Earth gravity style." She paused, letting her words settle. She looked at Quan Li. "It is not about your strength, cadet. You are stronger than I am, by a large amount." She looked at Choi Dae. "It is not about speed or technology. A repulsor blast is faster." She took a step away from the cracked circle on the floor, gesturing to it. "It is about being a conduit. The power does not come from me. I did not create it." She placed a hand on her own stomach, then pointed to her feet. "I gathered it from here, and I channeled it through here. The floor did not break because my hand is hard. It broke because the floor could not hold the force of the connection." June walked a few steps closer to the seated and standing cadets. Their eyes were wide, glued to her. All traces of boredom and dismissal were gone, replaced by a kind of fearful respect. "You train to overcome your worlds," she said. "You build stronger muscles to fight high gravity. You develop technology to float in low gravity. You become masters of your environments by opposing them." She stopped and looked at each of them. "We learned to borrow ours. Earth does not let you forget it. Its pull is constant. It is heavy. It is in every step, every jump, every fall. Our oldest disciplines are not about fighting that pull. They are about understanding it, using it, letting it anchor you so completely that you can then send its own nature back through you." She nodded towards the cracked spiderweb on the floor. "That is not a strike. That is a reminder of the world we come from. It is not easy." She let the word hang, making sure it was dead and buried. "It is efficient. It requires no battery, no fuel, just understanding. And that understanding is harder than any strength." June clasped her hands behind her back again, returning to her instructor's posture. "The lesson is over. You are dismissed. Tomorrow we will begin again with the first exercise. We will work on your stance, on your breath. We will see if any of you can find your own roots." No one moved immediately. They were still processing, still looking from the small, unassuming woman to the catastrophic damage at her feet. Finally, Kim Hannah bowed her head slightly, a gesture of respect. Slowly, one by one, the others began to gather their things, their movements hushed, their conversations mere whispers. They gave the cracked circle on the floor a wide berth, as if it were something sacred or something dangerous. Lee Jun stood and watched them go. The quiet in the hall was hers again, but now it was a quiet that everyone understood. The news did not just travel through the cadet corps. It vibrated through it. By the time Lee Jun had finished her cool-down stretches in the now-empty training hall, the story was already being told in whispers and excited bursts across the academy. In the main mess hall, Choi Dae was surrounded by cadets from his Venusian unit. "I'm telling you, she just stood there," he said, his voice a mix of shock and new respect. "No big wind-up, no screaming, just a push, and then the sound. You felt it in your teeth." He shook his head, looking down at his own hands. "And the floor just gave up." On the other side of the station, in the heavy-gravity training sector designed for species like the Taraxi, Quan Li was giving a demonstration of his own. He was not showing a fighting move. He was using a piece of scrap plating to explain structure. The fracture pattern, he rumbled to a small group of his peers, using a claw to trace lines in the air. It was not surface cosmetic. It was deep propagation. The energy was transferred through the material, not just onto it. Her strike did not hit the top. Targeted the core. He fell silent for a moment, his 4 eyes distant. My people break things with force. She broke it with truth. Kim Hannah did not join the big groups. She went straight to a quiet observation lounge that looked out at the swirling orange face of Jupiter. She sat alone, replaying the event in her mind. She closed her eyes and tried to mimic June's breath, the slow inhale, the settling feeling. On the moon, where she was from, such a deep breath would make you lightheaded. Here, the station's artificial gravity was close to Earth's, felt heavy and strange to her. She tried to feel rooted, but all she felt was the constant, unfamiliar pressure. For the first time, she understood that the easy training was for a world she could hardly imagine living on. It was a humbling thought. Meanwhile, Li Jun was walking down a quiet, administrative corridor. Her steps were the same as always. She was not heading to her quarters. She was heading to the office of Commander Bach, the Vulpian officer in charge of all training operations. She knew the report of the damage would have already reached him. A cracked Grade 7 arena floor was not a small thing. It was a significant piece of equipment, incredibly expensive to manufacture and install. She stopped in front of a smooth door. A soft chime announced her presence. The door slid open silently. Commander Bach's office was neat and organized. The Vulpian himself sat behind a wide desk, his russet fur groomed perfectly, his intelligent eyes fixed on a holographic report floating above the surface. The image showed a detailed scan of the cracked floor. He did not look up immediately. "Enter, Cadet Sergeant Instructor Lee," he said, his voice a smooth, dry rustle. He gestured with a slim, furred hand, and the hologram vanished. June walked in and stood at attention before the desk. "Commander." "At ease," Bach said. He finally looked at her, his pointed ears twitching slightly. "The maintenance subdirector is having a small fit. He says the floor in Arena Theta 3 is cracked. He says the damage pattern is consistent with a focused seismic event, not a weapons test." Bach leaned forward, placing his elbows on the desk. "The report says you did it. With your hand." "Yes, sir," June said, her hand still clasped loosely behind her back. "During a scheduled introductory lecture on Terran close combat principles." "Yes, sir." A lecture that, according to cadet feedback logs from last semester, is often described as, he glanced at another screen, theoretically interesting but physically underwhelming. June said nothing. She waited. Commander Bach stood up. He was not tall, but he moved with a graceful precision. He walked around the desk to stand closer to her. "You cracked a floor with a market value greater than that of a standard intersystem shuttle, Sergeant. Explain to me why this was a necessary teaching aid." June met his gaze. "The lesson was necessary, sir. They saw only the lack of flashy technology. They saw the simple movements and dismissed them as a dance. They forgot the foundation. Without understanding the foundation, the rest of the module is just steps. Empty steps. The foundation," Bach repeated. He walked over to a large viewport showing the starfield. "And what, in your view, is the foundation? Is it this routing technique?" "It is the reason for the technique, sir," June replied. "The foundation is the planet." Bach turned to look at her, one ear swiveling. "Elaborate. A Taraxi comes from a heavy world. They train to be strong enough to move within it. A Vulpian comes from a low-gravity world. You train for agility and speed to exploit it." She paused, choosing her words. "A human from Earth comes from a world that is insistently average. This gravity is not crushing. It is not gentle. It is a constant, demanding presence. It is the Goldilocks zone for gravity, and it is unforgiving in its consistency. It forges dense bones. It builds resilient muscle that is about endurance and stabilization, not just explosive power. It creates a tectonic reality where force must be grounded, or it will shake everything apart. She nodded towards the direction of the training hall. They saw the dance. They did not see the ground the dance is performed on. They trained to overcome their worlds, sir. We, from Earth, learned a long time ago that we could never overcome ours. So we learned to borrow from it, to listen to it. That strike was not my power. It was Earth's gravity, remembered and channeled. The cadets needed to see that the ground itself is part of the technique. Commander Bach was silent for a long time. He looked from June to the stars outside. Finally, a soft, chuffing sound escaped him, the Vulpian equivalent of a thoughtful sigh. You have turned a very expensive piece of flooring into a philosophical object lesson, Sergeant. I will accept any disciplinary action, sir, June said steadily. Bach waved a hand. The action is pending. The maintenance director will calm down. He always does. He moved back to his desk. Your class roster for tomorrow has increased by 37%. Cadets from every species are requesting transfers into your Earth combat module. It seems your demonstration was memorable. He looked at her, and this time, there was a glint in his eye that might have been amusement. Your new students will be expecting to break floors tomorrow, Instructor Lee. June allowed the smallest hint of a smile to touch her lips. Then they will be very disappointed, sir. Tomorrow we learn how to stand up, properly, without cracking anything. Commander Bach gave a slow nod. Dismissed, Sergeant. And June. She paused at the door. Try to keep the structural damage to a minimum. The budget committee is less philosophical than I am. Yes, sir. June left the office. The corridor was still quiet. She could feel a slight ache beginning in her palm, a deep bruise forming. It was a small price. The silence she walked in now was different. It was not the silence of being overlooked. It was the silence that comes after a truth has been told. And everyone was listening. The next morning, Training Hall Theta 3 was packed. Word had done its work. Cadets from every year and specialization filled the benches along the walls. They were not all supposed to be there. Many had swapped shifts or called in favors to get a glimpse. The air buzzed with low conversation and the rustle of different uniforms, the center of it all. The cracked floor was now a protected exhibit. A clear, hard polymer shield had been placed over it, and a low barrier ringed the area. It looked less like damage and more like an archaeological find. Cadets pointed at it, speaking in hushed tones. Lee June entered at the exact scheduled time. She wore the same simple training uniform. She carried no special gear. The crowd quieted as she walked to the front. She did not look at the shielded crack. She did not acknowledge the unusually large audience. She simply stood there and waited for the official members of her module to assemble on the practice floor. They came forward, moving with a new kind of awareness. Choi Dae was there, his earlier swagger replaced by a focused seriousness. Kwon Lee took his place, his four legs planting themselves with deliberate care, as if testing the solidity of the floor around him. Kim Hannah and Park Min stood together, their expressions alert and ready. June's eyes swept over her dozen students, then briefly over the crowd. This module is full, she stated, her voice carrying in the quiet room. For those not on the roster, you may observe, but you will not speak. You will not interrupt. Is that understood? A murmur of agreement came from the walls. She turned back to her cadets. Yesterday you saw an effect. Today we begin to study the cause. The cause is not in the hand. She held up her own hand, the palm still lightly reddened. The cause is here. She pointed to her feet. And here, she placed a hand on her lower stomach. We start with the most basic thing, how to stand. A few of the watching cadets shifted, disappointed. They had hoped for more drama, more breaking. June ignored them. The stance is called Jukum Seogi, a basic ready stance. Watch. She demonstrated, turning her body sideways, feet spread shoulder-width apart. 1 foot forward, knees slightly bent. It looked incredibly simple. Your weight is balanced, 60% on the back leg, 40 on the front. You are not leaning. You are not tense. You are stable. You are a tripod. She had them try it. It was awkward. Quan Li, with 4 legs, had to adapt the principle to his own body, focusing on a triangular stability with 3 of his limbs. Choi Dae kept locking his knees, standing too tall. Kim Hannah felt unsteady, the Earth-style stance feeling alien to her lunar sensibilities. Now, June said, walking among them, making small corrections with a gentle tap of her foot against theirs. We add breath. Inhale slowly. She demonstrated a long, deep pull of air. As you inhale, imagine you are drawing energy up from the floor, through your feet, up your legs, into your center. She placed a hand on her stomach again. Hold it for a moment. Feel the connection. Then exhale, slowly, and as you do, let that energy settle you. Let your feet feel heavy. Let your knees soften. You are not standing on the floor. You are growing from it. The room was silent except for the sound of breathing. Some cadets from the walls unconsciously mimicked the breath. It was harder than it looked. The simple act of standing still with intention was a profound exercise. For 20 minutes, they did nothing but stand and breathe. Muscles complained. Minds wandered. June moved patiently among them. Your mind is in your shoulders, Cadet Choi. Let it sink. Down to your feet. Cadet Kim, you are holding your breath. Breathe. The floor is not your enemy. It is your anchor. Finally, she called for a break. The cadets relaxed, some groaning as they straightened stiff legs. Choi Dae looked at his feet, then at the shielded crack in the floor. Instructor, he said, his voice respectful. How long? How long before we can understand that? He didn't say do that. He said, understand. June considered him. For you? A lifetime, perhaps, or a moment of true need. It is not a trick to be learned in a semester. It is a way of moving to be practiced for a lifetime. What you learn here are the seeds. Whether they grow depends on your soil. Quan Li approached during the break. He stood before June and gave a slow, deep nod with his whole upper body, a sign of great respect among Taraxi. Instructor Li, I spoke from ignorance yesterday. I saw the strength of my world as the only strength. You have shown me a different geology. I would learn this grounding, not to be a hammer, to be a mountain. June returned the nod. A mountain is an excellent start, Cadet Quan. A mountain does not try to be a mountain. It simply is. We start with simply being here. Now, the second half of the class was about falling. If you are rooted, you must also know how to fall without breaking your root, June explained. She demonstrated a basic backward roll, a way to dissipate force along the curve of the spine and back to the feet. You do not fight the fall. You accept its direction and redirect its energy. You let the floor take you, and you return to it. The cadets practiced on thick mats. They laughed as they tangled themselves, but they kept trying. The mood had changed completely. There was no mockery, only a shared, difficult pursuit. The watching cadets saw no magic, only hard, boring, basic work. But they also saw the absolute attention on the faces of those doing it. They saw Quan Li, a being who could lift a small vehicle, concentrating with total seriousness on how to roll over his wide back as the class ended. June gathered them. You took the first step today. You learned to stand, not to fight, to stand. Everything comes from this. Remember the feeling of the breath. Remember the heaviness in your feet. Carry it with you. In the mess hall, in the shuttle bay, in your quarters. Practice standing. The rest will follow. The cadets bowed, a gesture she had not taught them but one they offered anyway. They filed out, their conversations now about balance points and breath control. Kim Hannah lingered. She looked at the shielded crack, then at June. Instructor, she said softly. On the moon we are always light. We fear floating away. Our grounding is magnetic boots and handholds. What you describe, it is a different kind of belonging. June looked at the young lunar cadet. Then perhaps that is your key, Cadet Kim. You understand the fear of having no anchor. Now learn the strength of choosing one. even if it is only in your mind. The power is in the choice and in the belief that the ground will hold you. Kim Hannah thought about this, then nodded slowly. Thank you, instructor. June was left alone in the hall once more. The crowd was gone. The shield over the cracked floor gleamed under the lights. She walked over and placed her hand on the clear cover, directly over the center of the impact. The floor was just a floor again, but the lesson was now in the walls, in the air, in the stance of a dozen cadets who would never look at their own feet the same way again. The demonstration was over. The real training had finally begun. 3 weeks passed. The story of the cracked floor settled from a sensation into a legend. It was a known fact, a piece of Academy history that new cadets would hear about in whispers. But in Training Hall Theta 3, the work was quiet and steady. The clear shield was gone. The cracked section of floor had been cut out and replaced with a smooth, new plug of dark gray polymer. It was a perfect match, but everyone knew where it was. It was like a scar on the hall's skin. The cadets in Lee Jun's module unconsciously avoided stepping directly on it, treating it with a silent respect. The class itself had changed. There were no more challenges, no muttered doubts. When June spoke, the cadets listened with a focus that was almost physical. They were not just listening to words. They were trying to hear the principle behind them. Today, they were practicing a simple deflection, a way to redirect a forward push to the side. June paired them up. Choi Dae was paired with Kim Hannah. Kwon Lee worked with Park Min, the Martian adapting his two-legged techniques to work against the Taraxi's four-legged stability. Remember, June called out, walking between the pairs. Do not meet the force. Meet the person. Guide them. Their momentum is a gift to you. Use it. Choi Dae pushed towards Kim Hannah. A few weeks ago, he would have used all his Venusian strength to shove her over. Now he pushed with control, aiming to give her a clean energy to work with. Kim Hannah, following the steps, turned her body, caught his arm, and guided him past her. It was not perfect. She stumbled a little, and Choi had to catch his balance. But the theory was there. It was a cooperation, not a contest. Good, June said, nodding. Cadet Kim, your footwork was clean. Cadet Choi, your push was honest. Again. Across the room, Kwon Lee was a slow-moving mountain. Park Min could not hope to redirect his mass with strength. Instead, he used timing. As Kwon Lee leaned forward for a push, Park Min stepped slightly to the side and used Kwon Lee's own forward desire to unbalance him, just a little. It was like a stream diverting around a boulder. Kwon Lee rumbled, a sound of approval. You used my own weight. This is clever. After the drills, June gathered them in a circle. They sat on the floor, their breathing still deep from the exercise. You are learning the movements, she said. But the art is not in the movements. It is in the space between them. It is in the moment you decide to yield instead of resist. That decision is the real strength. It is a choice your opponent does not expect. She looked around at their faces. They were no longer a collection of individuals from different worlds. They were a unit, bonded by a shared, difficult understanding. The floor I cracked, she said, and every eye went to the repaired spot. It cracked because in that moment, there was no decision. There was only connection. The choice had been made a long time ago, through years of practice on a heavy world. When you master the choice, the power follows. Not before. The class ended. As the cadets were leaving, Commander Bach appeared at the doorway. He stood there, observing as they filed past him, offering him respectful nods. He said nothing, his Vulpian face unreadable. When only June remained, cleaning up a few stray water bottles, he stepped inside. Instructor Lee, he said. Commander, she replied. Straightening up, he walked to the center of the room, his soft boots making no sound. He stopped right on the repaired section of the floor. He looked down at it, then up at June. The maintenance director is happy. The repair is flawless. He is also terrified of you. A useful state for a maintenance director. June smiled slightly. I will try not to give him more reasons, sir. Bach's tail gave a single, slow swish. I have been reviewing the performance data of your cadets. Not just in here, in their other modules. Marksmanship, zero-G navigation, starship systems. He looked at her. They are improving. Across the board. Cadet Choi's focus has increased by 18%. Cadet Quan Lee's tactical decisions show less brute force thinking. Cadet Kim Hanna's stability scores in high-G simulations have improved significantly. He paused. They are learning more than a way to fight. They are learning a way to think. A way to be. June nodded. That is the foundation, sir. The foundation. Bach echoed. He looked around the empty hall, as if seeing the ghost of the spiderweb crack in the air. For decades, this module was on the review list. Many argued it was obsolete. A cultural relic, they said, that humanity's future was in the stars, not in the dirt. He turned his sharp eyes back to her. You have reminded us that humanity's future in the stars is built on the bones and the lessons from the dirt. That is a valuable reminder. More valuable than a floor. June felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the exercise. It was the feeling of being seen, not for a single shocking act, but for the quiet truth behind it. Thank you, sir. Do not thank me, Bach said, turning to leave. Just keep teaching, and try to keep the rest of my station in one piece. He left without another word. June was alone. She walked to the repaired spot and stood on it. She could feel nothing different. It was just floor. She closed her eyes and took a breath, feeling the familiar pull of the station's gravity. A faint echo of home. She thought of her grandmother's yard in Gyeongju. The packed earth. The relentless, generous pull of the planet. It was still there. It would always be there. And now, in this room, in the stance of a Venusian, in the careful consideration of a Taraxi, in the newfound balance of a lunar girl, a little piece of that understanding was there too. It was not about making them earthlings. It was about giving them a tool they never knew they needed. The power of standing firm, not just in body, but in mind. The lesson was not in the crack. The lesson was in the repair. In the continuous, unbroken effort to build something stronger on top of what was broken. She opened her eyes, switched off the lights, and left the hall. The floor, old and new, held the silence perfectly. It was ready for the next day's work.